The rain began the way it always did in Briar County, slow steady like the quiet tapping of fingers on an old wooden table. On the morning of October 14th, 2013, the town had just begun to stir when 17-year-old Lily Cartwright was reported missing. She had left school the day before around 4 to 12 p.m, caught on a blurry security camera walking into the dense fringe of Merrow Pines, a stretch of woodland notorious not for its danger, but for its silence. Her bedroom remained untouched. Her textbook still open, a mug of half-drunk chamomile tea by the window, and her diary lined with maroon leather fraying slightly at the corners lay shut on her desk. The police didn't open it at first. Not until a week had passed. Not until her mother Jane stopped sleeping. Not until her father Malcolm finally said aloud what no one wanted to say: she's not just missing. Page 43 is where the words stopped. Something is following me, the final entry read. I think it knows I know. It wasn't her handwriting, not exactly. Detective Nathan Harrow had seen his fair share of runaway cases. But this one unnerved him. There was no digital footprint. No calls, no texts, not even the usual high school noise. Lily had vanished like she'd been erased. Her best friend Ella DeWitt sat across from him at the station, fidgeting with the sleeves of her uniform. She was scared, Ella whispered, not quite making eye contact. Not of a person exactly. She said she felt like something was watching her. Did she say who Harrow asked? Ella hesitated. No, just that it wasn't new, like it had been there all along. They brought in the diary. The first 42 pages painted the picture of a quiet, sharp-witted girl who kept to herself. She wrote about school nature walks, her strained relationship with her father, who she only called M. But after page 38, something shifted. There were sudden jumps in tone, paranoia bleeding into the margins. Pages 41 and 42 were scribbled in jagged lines, phrases repeated like chants. The Pines hear everything. I saw the yellow house again. She told me not to look into the cellar. By the time they reached page 43, the writing sloped downward. The ink blotted, and that final sentence, I think it knows I know, seemed to have been carved, not written. The pen had torn through the page. No one could explain the yellow house. There was no such listing in Briar County. No house matching that description in any municipal records, until the satellite images came in. 1 mile into Merrow Pines, under a canopy of cedar and pine so dense it looked like ink spilled over the earth, was a structure with a yellow roof. No path led to it. No one remembered it being there. 2 weeks after Lily vanished, volunteers combed Merrow Pines for the third time. At precisely 6:42 a.m, 2 boys from the search party found what they thought was a doll. It wasn't. It was a hand, small, pale, clutching something. A clump of maroon leather almost buried in dirt. Another diary. Not Lily's. This one had the initials BM burned into the corner. The spine was broken. The pages water-damaged, barely legible. But the last entry was intact. October 13th, 1995. She's here again. Same red dress, same eyes. I told her I wouldn't tell, I swore. But she smiled like she knew I'd already written it down. Detective Harrow closed the book slowly, the cold already crawling up the back of his neck. In 1995, a girl named Becca Myers had gone missing in the same woods. 17. Walked home after choir practice. Never found. The diary had been buried just inches from the spot where the boys found it. Under the soil, a tangle of roots had wrapped around the leather like fingers. That night, Jane Cartwright got a call from a number with no caller ID. When she answered, it was silent until a voice light as air and distorted like an old tape whispered. She wrote too much. Then the line went dead. In the precinct's evidence room, Harrow stared at both diaries side by side. The handwriting on the last pages, Becca's and Lily's, was identical, but they were written 18 years apart. And then came the coroner's report. The hand they found, it wasn't Lily's. It had been buried for years, yet still clutching that diary like it had only just been written. Cliffhanger ending of part 1. At 2:11 a.m, a motion sensor camera placed near the Merrow Pines trailhead flickered to life. In the grainy footage, a figure in a red dress stepped out of the woods. She stood perfectly still, and then slowly lifted her hand and waved at the camera. Behind her, barely visible in the fog, a second figure stood motionless, smaller, with long dark hair. Timestamp October 14th, 2023. Exactly 10 years to the day since Lily Cartwright vanished. The footage was time-stamped, authenticated and reviewed by 3 separate analysts. No tampering, no digital manipulation. Yet what it showed didn't make sense, not even by the standards of rural ghost stories or local legends that tended to fester in places like Briar County. The figure in the red dress didn't move like someone lost or deranged. She moved like she knew. She turned to the camera, looked straight into the lens as if she could see through it, and waved slowly, deliberately. The childlike figure behind her didn't move at all, just stood there, head tilted, slightly hair covering most of the face. Detective Harrow didn't sleep that night. He watched the footage again, and again. When he finally paused it at the 22-second mark, his heart stalled. The smaller figure in the background, she was wearing a dark school uniform. Harrow had seen it before in the photo on Lily Cartwright's student ID, but the detail that tore something inside him was the ribbon. A pale blue ribbon tied around her wrist, exactly like the one Jane Cartwright had described in her missing persons report. A gift from her mother. Lily never took it off. 3 days later, forensic teams returned to Merrow Pines, this time with ground-penetrating radar and authorization to survey the surrounding area near the satellite-detected yellow roof structure. But when they arrived, there was no house. No clearing, no foundation, only trees, dense, undisturbed, as if the forest had swallowed the house whole. Still, the radar picked up a cavity beneath the earth, roughly rectangular, 6 feet wide, 8 feet deep. A shallow grave. They dug for hours, slowly, carefully, but what they unearthed was not a body. It was a staircase, narrow, stone, descending into something colder than the soil itself. At the bottom, a wooden door rotted and bowed from moisture. Etched into its surface, scratched in uneven letters, was a phrase repeated over and over. She waits, she waits, she waits. They called it the cellar, but it wasn't attached to any known structure. No remnants of a house, no ruins, no floorboards or beams, just a doorway beneath the forest. The team was told to wait for backup before breaching. Detective Harrow didn't wait. He descended alone. The air was thick, not musty, not mouldy old, like air that hadn't been breathed in decades. The flashlight flickered against damp stone walls. Carvings lined them. Names. Dozens of names. Some crossed out, some underlined, some faded into the rock itself. He paused at one that hadn't faded. Becca Myers, 1995. Then lower, Lily Cartwright, 2013. And beneath that, freshly carved, 2023. No name, just a question mark. Inside the cellar was a single room. Dust-covered shelves lined the walls, filled with what appeared to be personal items. Hairbrushes, shoes, ribbons, even toys. A kind of grotesque museum. And at the centre on a stone pedestal was a diary, new, untouched. Maroon leather, identical to Lily's. Detective Harrow stepped closer. This one had no initials, no number of pages. But when he opened it, he saw the first entry already written. My name is Clara, I'm 11. I don't know where I am. She says if I write, I'll stay. If I stop, I vanish. He turned the page. The girl in the red dress watches me while I sleep. She hums songs I don't know. Another page. She said Lily didn't write fast enough. Harrow slammed the diary shut, breath hitching in his throat. His flashlight flickered once, then died. And in the pitch black something breathed. Close. Too close. Outside, the radio crackled to life at base camp. Unit 3 to Harrow. Do you copy, Harrow? What's your... The static screamed. Then a girl's voice. Soft, like a whisper spoken through glass. Page 44, he opened it. They found Harrow at dawn, unconscious, lying just inside the cellar door, curled into a fetal position. No injuries, no signs of trauma. But when they woke him, he didn't remember his name. He didn't remember anything. And on his right wrist, someone had tied a pale blue ribbon. Cliffhanger ending of part 2. At the same hour Harrow was being admitted to the county hospital, Jane Cartwright received a small package at her doorstep. No return address. Inside was Lily's cell phone, cracked but intact. It turned on without a passcode. One video file, dated the night Lily disappeared. It was dark, shaky. Lily's voice was whispering. If you're seeing this, it found me. Don't trust the diary. Don't read past page 43. Then behind her something moved in the trees. The screen went black. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fear. Detective Nathan Harrow sat upright in the bed, eyes vacant, fingers twitching slightly under the thin blanket. The doctors called it dissociative fugue, a rare psychological state brought on by extreme trauma. But trauma from what they couldn't say. His blood work was clean, his vitals stable. There were no signs of head injury, but Harrow didn't know who he was, didn't recognise his own reflection, didn't speak a word, except for one sentence whispered just before midnight as the nurse leaned in to check his IV. She doesn't like when they stop writing. Jane Cartwright sat on her porch with the phone in her lap. She hadn't told the police yet, not about the video, not about the package. It was irrational maybe, but something deep in her marrow told her not yet. Told her that whoever or whatever sent it didn't want the police involved. so she watched it again. The video was 26 seconds long, shot in near total darkness. Lily's breathing was audible, shallow and quick. Her voice shook as she whispered. I followed the sound. I shouldn't have. There was no house, just a cellar door. I'm underground now. I don't think this is a place for the living. A scraping sound echoed behind her. Lily flinched. Her eyes darted toward the dark, and she turned the camera for a split second. That's when Jane saw it. A wall, covered in names. The video cut off right before Lily could say anything else. But Jane froze the frame and stared at the names burned into the stone behind her daughter. One of them was Jane Cartwright. Her own name, dated 2025. The future! The next morning, Harrow spoke again. It was brief, disconnected. She's writing now, the new girl, Clara. She's on page 31. Then he grabbed the nurse's arm. His grip was tight, desperate. She's not doing it fast enough. They tracked down Clara. The missing person report had been buried beneath a stack of others from nearby counties. Clara Wells, age 11, vanished 2 months ago in the next town over Prescott Hollow. She'd been walking home from piano lessons. No known connection to Lily. No leads, no media attention. Just another small-town tragedy. But Clara had drawn something in her last school art project. A crude crayon sketch. A red house. A girl with no face. And a book with page numbers floating out like birds. Ella DeWitt hadn't spoken to Jane Cartwright since the funeral. Not Lily's. Jane's husband Malcolm died of a heart attack 7 months after their daughter vanished. Some said it was grief. Others whispered it was guilt. Now Ella returned to the Cartwright home for the first time since high school. Jane showed her the video. Ella watched it in silence, her eyes narrowing when Lily mentioned the cellar. I've been there, she said. Jane stared. What? Not inside, but Lily took me once before she went missing, said she wanted to show me something. But when we got close she changed her mind, said it wasn't safe if we both went. Jane's voice cracked. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Ella's gaze dropped to her hands. Because she made me promise. She said if anyone else followed her, it would choose someone new. In the precinct evidence room, Officer Caden Lowe was reviewing both diaries when he noticed something odd. Page 44 in Becca Meyer's journal, the one supposedly never reached, was blank. But under UV light, faint indentations appeared, as if someone had written then erased. The lines were messy, panicked. I can hear Lily crying. She's behind the wall, the pages are bleeding now. She told me her mother would be next. Officer Lowe called Harrow's hospital room, but Harrow was gone. Vanished sometime between 3:40 and 4:00 a.m. Security footage showed him walking barefoot down the hallway, toward the exit, smiling. Cliffhanger ending of part 3. At 4:13 a.m. a new diary arrived on the steps of the Cartwright home. No postage, no note. Jane opened it slowly. First page. My name is Jane Cartwright. If you're reading this, then I didn't finish in time. Page 2 blank. Page 3 blank. She flipped to the end. Page 43 was already written. Her handwriting, but she hadn't touched a pen. The maroon leather felt warm. Jane Cartwright sat motionless on her kitchen floor, the diary balanced in her trembling hands. It was unmistakably hers, the handwriting, the subtle slant of her cursive, the looping F's she learned from a convent school decades ago. The first page began with her name. The following pages unraveled in precise, intimate detail her daily routine, her thoughts, even the things she hadn't told anyone. Not even Malcolm. Things about Lily, about that final argument, about the slap. None of it had been written by her hand, but it had come from her. Every word. And it had stopped abruptly on page 43. I hear her now. The girl in red. She stands just outside the door. I think she's waiting for me to open it. Jane shut the diary and backed away. The house was too quiet. The air felt heavier than it had the night before, as if someone was standing just beyond the reach of the hallway light. She turned every light on in the house. She didn't sleep. By morning the story had broken. Local news stations caught wind of Harrow's disappearance, and the Cartwright Diary as they now called it. Whispers of the missing girls and the woods and the red-dressed figure began to swirl through Briar County like ash in a cold wind. Reddit forums lit up. Amateur investigators posted screenshots of the diary entries Jane refused to let them have. Ella's name was leaked. Her voicemail filled with anonymous warnings. One message stood out, a synthetic voice slightly distorted. Don't let her finish page 44. Then the sound of a slow knock. 3 times, like someone knocking from inside a wall. Detective Harrow's phone pinged a signal near the northern edge of Merrow Pines. Not the usual trailhead, but a deer path long since overgrown. Officers and volunteers swept the area again, no sign of him, until they found the coat, folded neatly on a moss-covered rock. his badge tucked inside the front pocket, and beneath it a scrap of paper torn from a diary, page 41, in Lily's writing. She knows about Jane now. Jane tried to burn the diary. She doused it in lighter fluid, watched it curl in the flames, but when she checked the fireplace the next morning it was sitting untouched on the mantel. Open, page 44 had begun. Half a sentence. She's knocking now. The words were being written without her. That night Ella returned. She'd brought something. A photograph. From the fall of 1994. A group of schoolgirls in plaid skirts and windbreakers posing beside a battered yellow house deep in the woods. No one had remembered the photo existed, taken on a disposable Kodak left in a dusty photo album in her grandmother's attic. On the back in blue ink, choir trip, Merrow Pines, Octa 94, girl in red dress, Becca's cousin. Jane's throat dried. There was no house. Ella nodded slowly. But there was. And that photo was taken a year before Becca went missing. They scanned the faces. Becca was there. So was Ella, and another girl, partially obscured face turned slightly away. She wore a red dress. Not a school uniform. No one could remember her name. No one remembered her at all. At 3:17 a.m, Jane woke to the sound of her daughter humming, a melody she had only heard once before on the old home video from Lily's 3rd birthday. She followed the sound breath shallow through the hallway and down into the dark. The hum was coming from the basement. Jane hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to stop. But she descended. The light bulb flickered once, twice, then went dark. In the faint moonlight bleeding through the small window she saw it. A page, pinned to the wall with a sewing needle. Page 44. It was finished. She's behind the mirror, watching me write. If I stop, she takes the one I love most. I can't stop. I won't stop. In the reflection, something moved. Not Jane. Not only Jane. The girl stood behind her. Hair black, face blank, a dress the colour of dried blood. She smiled and whispered. Page 45 is yours. Cliffhanger ending of part 4. 2 towns over in a quiet cul-de-sac in Prescott Hollow, 11-year-old Clara Wells's mother jolted awake to the sound of a diary slamming shut. She ran into her daughter's room. Clara was gone. The window open, and on the desk a fresh page written in maroon ink. I'm sorry, I couldn't finish. She said it's Jane's turn now. The wind through Merrow Pines had teeth. Deputy Logan Price squinted into the dawn haze boots cracking over frostbitten leaves. They had found Clara Wells's shoes at the tree line, placed side by side, socks folded neatly inside. No prints led in or out. Just the pale indentation of small feet pointing toward the woods. Price radioed in a code for child abduction, but even as he said it, he felt the word wrong in his mouth. This didn't feel like an abduction. It felt like Clara went willingly. Back at the Cartwright home, Jane was unravelling. She hadn't left the house in days, hadn't slept more than a few hours. The maroon diary now lay sealed in a Tupperware container, duct-taped shut, shoved to the back of her freezer. And yet, she could still feel it. Still hear it, the soft, dry sound of pages turning on their own in the middle of the night. Sometimes the TV would flicker on, other times the shower would run, filling the drain with muddy water. But worst of all, every morning at 4:43 a.m, she would find a new page written on her kitchen table, her handwriting always halfway through a sentence. Words she didn't remember writing. She kept them all, hidden in a shoebox. By now there were 9, and each one ended the same way. She's closer tonight. In a moment of desperation, Jane reached out to the only person she hadn't yet, Becca Myers' mother. Eileen Myers lived alone now in a rundown duplex across from the old tannery. She opened the door, slowly, eyes sunken, hands arthritic and trembling from decades of unanswered questions. When Jane introduced herself, Eileen didn't blink. You saw her too, didn't you? Jane nodded, jaw clenched. In the mirror. Eileen stepped aside. Her living room was full of mirrors. Some shattered. Some draped in black cloth. One of them had been painted over with red nail polish in thick strokes that read, "Do not turn around." I see her most when I'm alone, Eileen whispered. She likes mothers. That's how she finds the next one. Jane swallowed. You think she's choosing us? Eileen looked away. She's trading us. That night Jane heard the humming again, this time from inside her bedroom closet. She didn't open it. She pressed her ear to the door. The sound was unmistakable. It wasn't just humming, it was Lily's voice, singing. The lullaby Jane used to sing to her when she was a baby. Hush now, shadows play, mama's here, don't drift away. Jane fell to her knees. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered through the door, Lily, please come back. The humming stopped. A whisper followed, but it wasn't Lily. It was cold and smooth, like something mimicking a voice it didn't understand. Mama's here, it said. Don't drift away. Then knock, knock, knock from inside the closet. Ella, meanwhile, was descending into obsession. She'd found another diary, tucked in the back of her late grandmother's closet in a forgotten box labelled Church Records. It belonged to a girl named Diane Thorne, disappeared in 1977, 17 years old, went missing after Sunday choir. No one had ever linked her to Merrowpines, until now. Page 43. She comes when we stop singing, the silence is what feeds her. We didn't finish the hymn, that's how she found us. Page 44, blank, except for the blood. A single fingerprint in the corner. Small, dried, preserved in time. Ella had it tested. It was a match for Lily. Meanwhile, in the hospital wing of the Bryan County Behavioural Unit, Detective Harrow sat drawing symbols in crayon. He hadn't spoken since his escape and recapture, but his drawings were getting clearer. The same figure appeared over and over, a girl in red. No eyes, a mouth that stretched too wide. And always with her the diary. One page in particular caught a nurse's attention. A sketch of a cellar, crude steps, a circle of mirrors on the walls. In the centre a mother, kneeling, writing. On the back of the page, written in a child's block letters, if she writes page 45, the door stays open. Cliffhanger ending of part 5. At precisely 4:43 a.m, the freezer in Jane's kitchen popped open on its own. Inside the Tupperware container, the diary was no longer frozen. The plastic had melted into warped, sticky ribbons. And the diary, now open to page 45. The ink was still wet. One sentence. Jane Cartwright is ready, and beneath it an unfamiliar signature in thin red script. Clara Wells. They found Clara Wells's body at the edge of the lake just before dawn. Wrapped in reeds, her small hands folded over her chest, clutching a maroon leather book soaked through with silt. The medical examiner noted no signs of trauma, no water in the lungs. It was as though she had simply stopped moving, stopped being. Deputy Price, who had been the first to find her, sat on the tailgate of his cruiser afterward and refused to speak for 3 hours. When he finally did, his voice was thin and unsteady. She looked peaceful, he said, but the way she was smiling, it wasn't hers. Jane Cartwright didn't cry when they told her. She didn't blink. She just walked to the freezer, opened the warped, reeking container and retrieved the diary. Page 45 was now complete, filled in her handwriting, though she never touched a pen. It was a letter to Lily, but not the kind a grieving mother would write. This one was colder, detached, as if something was using her voice. You're not mine anymore, you're hers now. I see that. I understand. But if I must give you to her, I ask only this, let me forget you when it's done. Jane's hand trembled. Her lips moved, mouthing the words in sync with the page. Something inside her was breaking, and something else was moving into the space left behind. Ella had gone off-grid. She'd taken her grandmother's old station wagon and driven out toward the state line toward an abandoned logging town called St. Bellamy. The town had been uninhabited since 1979, evacuated after a fire wiped through the valley. But Ella wasn't looking for people. She was looking for names. Names like Diane Thorne, Becca Myers, Clara Wells, Lily Cartwright, and one more she hadn't expected. Jane Cartwright, 2025. In the hushed archives of the burned-out town library, she found a torn piece of microfilm showing a group of women from the 1960s gathered around a schoolhouse. At the centre in perfect focus was a girl in a red dress, unsmiling, hands folded in front of her. No caption, no name, but etched faintly into the back of the photograph was a phrase in Latin. Scriptura est porti. Ella translated it by flashlight, her breath fogging the air. The writing's the doorway. That night in the woods behind the Cartwright home, the wind carried something unnatural, a low rhythmic sound. Pages turning, and from the tree line a flicker of red. Jane stood barefoot in the grass, the diary clutched to her chest. She's coming, she whispered. She's almost here. Then her head snapped toward the trees. She wants to be me. Inside the diary, new entries began to appear, handwriting Jane didn't recognise. Not hers, not Lily's. It was smaller, careful, like someone mimicking script they had only seen from a distance. One passage read, I was the first. She took my name, took my face. Every 43 pages she needs a new one. That's how she stays real. Another. Don't let her finish page 46. If she finishes it in your hand, you disappear. You don't die, you dissolve. Jane slammed the book shut. Too late. Her fingers were stained with red ink. It had started. Back in St. Bellamy, Ella stood before the remains of the old schoolhouse. Half the roof had collapsed and vines had eaten the porch steps, but the basement was still intact. Inside, she found stone walls lined with mirrors, shattered, warped, clouded, and on the far wall a list carved deep into the brick. Each name followed by a number. Some had stars beside them. Jane Cartwright, 25. Ella traced the star with her fingertip. Behind her a soft creak. She turned. In the mirror, her own face blinked back, but there was someone standing behind her. A girl face, pale eyes, black-red dress swaying slightly as if in a breeze that didn't exist. Ella spun around. Nothing. Just the hollow of the old schoolhouse. Cliffhanger ending of Part 6. Back in Briar County, Jane woke to find her daughter's diary on the kitchen table. It was Lily's original, pages 1 through 43, untouched. Blank, except for the last line newly written, "Mama, she's letting me go now, but only if you finish my pages." Jane turned the last sheet. A single word began to bleed through from page 44. Begin. In the soft blue quiet of morning, Jane Cartwright stared at the final word. Begin, bleeding through the last page of her daughter's diary like it had been written in something more alive than ink. Outside, the sky was grey, not with weather, but with waiting. She sat at the table, the pen resting in her hand without weight. Lily's diary. A blank page, a silent command. If she wrote, maybe she'd get her daughter back. If she didn't, she felt it now. The watching, not from the woods, not from mirrors, but from within. Ella's return was sudden and frantic. She banged on Jane's door just past 5 a.m. Her clothes wet with dew hair, tangled eyes sunken. "You can't write," she said before Jane could even open her mouth. "You can't even start, not one word." Jane backed away. She said, "No," Ella cut in, voice cracking. "That's not her. Not Lily. She's wearing Lily." And then in a whisper, "She's done it before." Ella dropped a photograph on the kitchen table. It was the same red-dressed girl, but this time the photo was dated 1891. Jane's breath caught. "Is this the same one?" Ella nodded. "Same dress, same face, and in every photograph, every newspaper clipping every missing girl, there's always a diary. Always 43 pages. Never 44 unless..." Jane whispered it with her. "Unless she finds a new voice." They stood in silence. The house creaked once long and low like an old ship taking on water. Jane finally spoke. "If I don't write, she'll take someone else." Ella grabbed her hand. "You don't know that." "I do," Jane said, "because I saw something last night." She opened a drawer and pulled out her shoebox of pages, each one written in her hand, though never by her choice. She'd never shared them with anyone. Until now. Ella sorted through them, reading silently. Each page a slow erosion of identity. Her voice was fading, becoming something else. By the last note, Jane no longer called herself Jane. She signed it. Mother of Red. That night, the town held a candlelight vigil for Clara Wells by the lake. Jane didn't attend, but the wind did. It blew cold across the still surface of the water, and at 4:40 a.m., the candles flickered and died out simultaneously. The next morning, the statue erected in Clara's memory, an angel with one hand raised was found with a smear of red across its eyes. A child's palm print. Ella spent the following day in the county library archives pulling the pieces together. It wasn't a spirit. It wasn't a demon. It was a story. An ancient one. Older than the town. Older than the woods. A kind of narrative parasite. It lived through people, specifically women. Mothers, daughters, girls on the cusp of vanishing. It needed them to write to be believed to exist. Every diary was a vessel. Every name carved in stone was a chapter. The entity moved through written word. And when it finished telling one version of itself, it found another. But there was a flaw, a limitation. Every diary stopped at page 43 because after that the voice became hers. At 2:22 a.m, Jane awoke to the soft fluttering sound of pages turning. Her hands were stained with red again. She stumbled to the mirror above the mantel. Lily stood behind her reflection, smiling, but Jane didn't turn around. She just whispered, "Tell me one thing. Are you still in there?" The reflection didn't answer, but Lily's eyes blinked once. Slow, and a tear slid down her cheek. Ella returned just before dawn with the last piece of the puzzle. A forgotten article from 1954. A fire in a small mining town in Kentucky. One survivor, a girl who walked out of the blaze carrying a half-burned journal. Her name wasn't listed, but in the photo her hands were coated in soot and red ink. She was smiling. Ella turned to Jane, breathless. It's not just about finishing, it's about recording, it's about making sure her story never ends. Jane nodded slowly. So what if I give her the ending? Cliffhanger ending of part 7. At 4:43 a.m, Jane Cartwright placed the diary on her daughter's old desk. She opened to page 46, took the pen, and began to write. "You do not own my daughter. You do not own me. This is where it ends." She looked up. In the mirror, the red-dressed girl frowned. Behind her, the walls of the room began to peel, paint cracking, glass warping. But Jane kept writing. And at the bottom of the page, she wrote 4 final words. "Your story ends here." The house went still. Then, a knock at the front door. 3 slow, deliberate taps. The knock echoed through the silence like something primal. Jane Cartwright stood still, the pen falling from her fingers. The diary lay open on page 46. Her words, stark and final, bled through the paper like a wound. Your story ends here, but something in the air shifted when she wrote it. Not a release, not closure, irritation. Behind her, the mirror above the mantel cracked slowly like ice fracturing under pressure. Another knock, louder this time. She stepped toward the door, each footfall heavy as breath in a mausoleum. Through the peephole, nothing, just fog. Until she blinked. A girl stood there, hair soaked, eyes wide, shivering in a thin t-shirt and pyjama pants. It was Lily. Jane threw the door open. Her daughter collapsed into her arms bones like matchsticks, body ice cold. Mum, Lily gasped. You brought me back. But Jane didn't move. She held her daughter, yes, but her arms remained cautious. Her mind sharp. Because something was wrong. Lily's hands. They were clean. No ink, no dirt, no scars from what she should have endured. And when she spoke again, her voice clipped in an odd cadence, as if remembering how to be human. I'm hungry, she said. Do you still make cinnamon toast, like when I was 5? Jane's blood ran cold. Lily hated cinnamon. Ella arrived moments later, breathless library books and manila folders under her arm. She froze when she saw Lily sitting on the couch. Jane, she whispered, that's not her. Lily's head snapped toward her, smile widening just a little too far. Hi, Ella, you've been reading about me, haven't you? The air thickened. Ella dropped her bag. Where's Lily? The girl tilted her head. You're still not getting it. Lily is here. She tapped her chest once, but she's not driving anymore. Then softly, she stopped on page 43. Jane's voice was steady. If you're not my daughter, then why come back? The girl's smile faltered. I didn't. You called me. You finished the page. She stood slowly. Her limbs moved fluidly but slightly off like a puppet whose strings were too tight. You gave me the ending, and I'm here to start the next story. Jane reached for the diary on the table, but the girl was faster. She placed her palm over it gently. You're not the author anymore. The lights flickered. From every reflective surface in the room, glass screens, mirrors, other faces began to appear. Pale lost girls, eyes wide, mouths open in silent scream. Some held diaries. Some were halfway dissolved into the dark behind them. The girl turned back to Jane, her voice now echoing in a strange layered frequency. You ended my story, so I'm taking yours. She reached out a hand, but Jane didn't move. Instead, she did something no one expected. She smiled. Good, Jane whispered, because I wrote 2 endings. The girl paused, confused. Behind her, Ella retrieved a second diary from her bag, an exact replica. One they'd been preparing for weeks, blank except for one inscription. This is fiction, the girl hissed. You can't lie to me, I'm written truth. Ella opened the fake diary and began to read aloud. The red-dressed girl walked into the room expecting to find control, but she found only mirrors, and mirrors reflect the truth back onto the liar. The room began to vibrate. Glass cracked. The reflections turned to face the red-dressed girl, and for the first time, they didn't look scared. They looked angry. From the pages of the real diary still on the table, red ink began to pour out. But it wasn't ink. It was liquid viscous and alive crawling up the girl's arm. No, she whispered. No, I'm not finished. The diary snapped shut. The lights went out. A shriek echoed through the room, not loud, not human. When the power returned, the girl was gone. Only the diary remained. Closed. Smoking. And on the cover no longer maroon, but black. Cliffhanger ending of part 8. Jane and Ella stood in silence. The air was heavy with aftermath. Then from upstairs, a creak, a footstep, followed by a soft voice. One Jane hadn't heard in 10 years. Mum! They turned slowly toward the staircase. Lily stood at the top. Her real eyes, her real voice, and she was holding something in her hands. A page, blank, except for one sentence, written in Jane's handwriting. This is not the end. The page trembled in Lily's hands. She descended the stairs slowly barefoot, like a dream returning after a long absence. Her cheeks were hollow but real. Her breath was visible in the cold air that still clung to the house like fog that had never left. Jane stared at her daughter's face. The way she blinked. The way she held the paper. It was her, but nothing about this moment felt safe. Ella reached for the page, heart pounding. Her fingers brushed the paper. The ink was still wet. She brought it to the light. This is not the end. And beneath it, in smaller print, almost invisible, sunken into the fibres. If the story ends, she dies. If the story continues, so does she. Ella's face went pale. This wasn't written by you, she said. Lily looked down. I didn't write it. Jane exhaled. Then who did it? Lily raised her eyes. She did. And the lights went out again. In the dark, a single noise broke the silence, a soft thud from upstairs, followed by a creaking door. Then another, then another. Ella flicked on her flashlight. Its beam caught the hallway mirror, and in it 12 girls, standing still, watching. Their reflections moved, but the room remained empty. Then the mirror cracked from the inside out, a fissure down the middle, and as the light sputtered, the diary on the table opened itself. Pages flipped rapidly, fluttering like wings in a storm. Page 47. Each page blank, except for a growing red stain in the centre. Then words began to appear, in all caps, written like screaming. She's still writing. She never stopped. She was never trapped. You were. Jane snatched the book and slammed it shut. It kept opening, like it refused to be silenced. They took it outside, into the freezing woods, the last place it had been buried. Ella poured lighter fluid over the cover, her hands shaking. I don't think this will work, she whispered. Jane nodded grimly. It won't stop her, but it might stop me from writing. She held the match, paused, then struck it. The flame caught instantly, dancing across the leather cover. For a moment it seemed to burn. Then the fire turned black, and screamed, a high-pitched whine, not through air but through bone. Jane and Ella dropped to their knees, clutching their ears, and when the sound stopped, the diary was gone. Nothing remained but a scorched circle in the snow. They returned to the house, and found Lily asleep on the couch, breathing evenly, dreaming. Jane touched her daughter's forehead and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Warmth, not just physical, but real, whole, human. The days passed. Ella left town. Jane stayed. Lily remembered little, only fragments. Echoes. She never spoke of the girl in red, never touched another journal. Sometimes she'd stand at the mirror too long, but always turned away before the silence thickened. Jane kept every remaining page locked away in a safety deposit box, untouched, unread, but stories, as they say, have gravity, and some pages don't burn. Some endings resist closure. On the first warm day of spring, Jane received a manila envelope in her mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single Polaroid. A mirror. In it, Jane stood with Lily smiling. But behind them, barely visible, was a figure in red, and scribbled on the back in unfamiliar cursive. Page 50. Cliffhanger ending of Part 9. That night, as thunder rolled across Briar County, and the wind knocked branches against the glass, Jane walked into her kitchen. On the table was a notebook. New blank, but familiar. The pen lay beside it, and carved into the first page, so faint she almost didn't see it, was a sentence. Tell me another story, Mama. Jane Cartwright stood in the doorway of her kitchen, barefoot on the cold tile, staring at the notebook on the table. It wasn't hers. It hadn't been there when she turned out the lights, but she recognized it anyway. Same maroon leather, same weight, same invitation, and there it was again, etched softly into the first page in almost childlike script. Tell me another story, Mama. Jane didn't move, didn't blink. She reached slowly for the notebook, not to write, but to close it, to end it. But her fingers paused above the cover, hovering like they had before. Somewhere in the house, Lily stirred in her sleep. The girl she'd buried 10 years ago, who now breathed softly upstairs. If she wrote, would it keep her safe? If she didn't, would it take her again? Ella returned the next day. She'd driven all night. A storm had taken down part of the interstate, but she didn't stop. Not once, because something had changed. She brought a name, one that wasn't in the news, one not connected to any diary or missing girl. A local woman in her 70s, widowed, lived alone, had no children. She died in her sleep. Peaceful, they said, except for what she left behind. A notebook, pages torn out, the remaining entry unfinished. I see her now, in the window across the street, red like blood, eyes like oil, and below it a postscript in smaller, unfamiliar hand. Thank you for the story. Ella looked at Jane. It's moving on. Finding new vessels doesn't need the woods anymore. Jane nodded. No, now it needs belief, attention, the shape of a story. She held up the Polaroid. Page 50. For weeks Jane wrestled with what to do. Burn the notebook. Bury it. Publish it. What if the story, this entity, this voice needed to be told in order to be contained? Or worse, in order to grow? She found herself thinking more and more like it. What makes a good ending? She had written one before, and it hadn't been enough. Then came the dream. She stood in Merrow Pines again as they once were, lush, still untouched. Lily was walking ahead humming, only this time she wasn't wearing red. She was barefoot in white, holding her mother's hand. And beside her, other girls, all the missing, alive, silent, watching. They lined the trail like witnesses at a trial, their eyes not afraid but waiting. As Jane turned to follow Lily deeper into the woods, the trees fell away. And there it was, a final page, hanging in the air, blank. Waiting for ink, she awoke with tears on her face and her decision made. She opened the notebook, took a deep breath, and wrote one line. "I refuse to carry your voice." Then she shut the book, wrapped it in burlap and placed it in a small metal box, and buried it deep 6 feet under. Not in the woods, but beneath concrete. She poured the foundation of a new library wing herself. No one else knew what was under it, only that the room above would be silent. Always. Years passed. Lily graduated. They moved to the coast. Jane never wrote again. Not journals, not letters, not even holiday cards. She kept no mirrors in the house. No diaries. Only shelves of blank notebooks she never touched. People called it a quirk, but she knew. Silence, too, is a kind of protection. And somewhere in another town, another state, another girl finds a page tucked in the back of a thrift store book. Just one. It says, she stops at 43, but the girl doesn't understand. Not yet. She slips it in her backpack and walks home under the yellow dusk. The wind picks up. A page flutters behind her. Blank, except for 2 words scrawled in red ink. Sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that keep writing themselves. If this story unsettled you, moved you, or made you look twice at your mirror tonight, leave a comment, share it with someone, and if you dare, subscribe for the next story. You never know which page you'll turn next.